All right, today we're diving into something, well, pretty fascinating. It's a theory from a single source that tries to connect the scriptural origins of humanity with, believe it or not, modern genetics. The idea is that there's this kind of hidden biological blueprint for our existence. So yeah, let's get right into it.
So let me ask you a question, a really fundamental one. How many ways can a person, a human being, actually come into existence? Now, your first thought is probably, well, one, obviously. But the source material we're looking at today, it has a very different and pretty surprising answer.
And here it is, the core claim of this whole theory. It argues that throughout all of human history, there haven't been one, or two, or even three ways, but exactly four distinct forms of human existence. And what's really wild is that each one is supposed to have its own unique origin story, and, this is the crucial part, its own genetic explanation.
Okay, so let's break them down. Form number 1. According to this text, it's the man who came from nothing. No father, no mother. And as you've probably guessed, this figure is identified as the very first man, Adam.
Now, the author actually comes up with a specific term for this. They call it non-parentism. It's meant to describe this totally unique creation event, right? Completely free from any biological parents, any genetic history. The source presents this as the absolute starting point. Think of it like a biological Big Bang for the entire human family tree. All right, so from that starting point, we get to the second form, and this one builds directly on the first. It's the woman who came from the man. And yeah, you know who we're talking about. The source identifies this figure as Eve, created directly from Adam. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the author tries to connect that religious story directly to a biological concept. The source text claims that the rib wasn't just a bone. No, it says it contained the bone marrow, which it calls the source of the entire genetic map of that first human being.
So what does the author call this one? X monoparentism. And the logic goes something like this. Since Adam had both X and Y chromosomes, he basically had all the genetic material needed to produce an XX female. The source doesn't just hint at it, it explicitly frames this whole thing as a kind of miraculous cloning, just, with a change in sex.
Okay, that brings us to the third form, and this one is presented as the most complex of them all. We're talking about the man born from a woman, but with no biological father. This figure, of course, is identified as Jesus. And following the pattern we've seen so far, the author doesn't just leave this as a miracle. Nope. Just like the others, the source puts forward a specific genetic mechanism to try and explain how this could, at least in theory, be scientifically possible. Okay, before we get into the weeds on that, let's do a super quick biology refresher. You probably know this, but typically females have two X chromosomes, right? XX, and males have an X and a Y. And it's that Y chromosome that usually carries the key gene, the one that flips the switch for male development. All right, so here's the absolute linchpin of the author's whole argument for form number 3. The text points to a real, although very rare genetic condition. It's called XX male syndrome. And just like it sounds, it's a condition where an individual has female XX chromosomes but develops as a male. And the key to how this happens, both in modern genetics and according to the source, is a single gene called SRY. So here's how the hypothesis is laid out step by step. First, you've got that SRY gene, let's call it the male switch, which is normally sitting on the Y chromosome. But the source theorizes, in a super rare event called a translocation, that little gene can actually jump ship and attach itself to an X chromosome. And the result, you get an XX individual who develops male characteristics. Now here's a crucial detail the source points out. Individuals with this real-life syndrome are typically sterile, and it makes a point of connecting that fact back to the religious narrative. And that brings us to the final form, the fourth one. This is the one we're all, very familiar with. This is the part of the theory where the author tries to tie everything together and present what they believe is a complete, grand design. So what's the fourth form called? Simply parentism. And it's exactly what you think it is. Standard human reproduction. The creation of a new life from both a father and a mother. It's us. It's our reality. And in this whole framework, it basically serves as the baseline, the everyday normal that you compare the other 3 unique forms against. And here's where we can see the whole model laid out together. It's pretty neat. You've got Adam's non-parentism, creation from 0 parents. Then Eve's X monoparentism, from a male parent only. Then the third form, which the author calls Y monoparentism, from a female parent only, using that whole SRY gene theory. And finally, there's us, with parentism, from both parents. See the pattern? According to the author, every possible combination has now been covered. Okay, so you see the whole framework. The big question, the obvious one, is why? I mean, why go through all the trouble of building this intricate model connecting scripture and genetics? What's the point? Well, the author is actually very upfront about their motivations and what they think this theory proves. From the author's perspective, this model is supposed to be proof of some really big ideas. They argue it shows a divine grand design in action, that it reveals a perfect harmony between the Quran and science, and even that it's the definitive takedown of Darwin's theory. The central argument really is that these four forms aren't random. They represent a complete, divinely written genetic program for all of humankind. And that really brings us to the final thought here. You know, regardless of whether you buy into this specific theory or not, just think about it for a second. What does this incredibly detailed attempt to link ancient scripture with modern genetics tell us about ourselves? About that deep human need to find patterns, to find order, and to create a coherent story for our own existence. It's just a fascinating glimpse into that place where faith, science, and our universal search for meaning all come together.